Hello, friends. This is the Alphalist podcast. I am your host, Toby. The goal of the Alphalist podcast is to empower CTOs with the info and insight they need to make the best decisions for their company. We do this by hosting top thought leaders and picking their brains for insights into technical leadership and tech trends. If you believe in the power of accumulated knowledge to accelerate growth, make sure to subscribe to this podcast. Plus, if you're an experienced CTO, you will love the discussion happening in our Slack space where over 600 CTOs are sharing insights, or visit one of our events. Just go to alphalist.com to apply. Welcome to the Alphalist podcast. I'm your host, Toby, and I recently had a recording with a CTO of a 10 billion in revenue and 500 billion in market cap company. And today I have a guest. I think my CTO friends will be way more jealous than on the CTO I interviewed recently. And the guest is called Mike Perham, and he's the founder of Sidekiq. And Sidekiq is actually like an interesting project he's going to tell us about. It's actually a tool that most Ruby people might know. It got like 12K stars on GitHub, and it's very, very popular. It's both open source and commercial. And he, at a certain point, decided to make a living out of that. And Mike, did I forget anything about you? Can you tell us a bit more?
Sure. Hi, Toby. Thanks for having me. The key odd thing about me is that I, from day one, vowed that I would not hire anybody. So, as you were saying, your CTO friends might be jealous because I have no employees. I have millions of dollars in annual revenue with no employees managing anything. So it's just me. I do everything from product development support to billing and taxes and all that fun stuff, bookkeeping. So I do a little bit of everything here at Contributed Systems.
Do you still talk about how many millions in revenue you make, or did you stop communicating?
No, I'm happy to share those numbers. I did about 4 million last year, so almost exactly 4 million. And then this year I would expect to do another 20% higher. So I project probably about 5 million this year.
Okay, now I'm really jealous. So, and how much do you actually work?
As much as I need to, really. There's always something broken, right? There's things when you're the only guy at the company. There's always something to do. So I'm in tax season, so I'm doing taxes. And here in the US, taxes are 100 times harder than in Europe, right? In the US, taxes have been gamed to be really difficult. And so I've got an accountant who does that, but I also do all the bookkeeping. So there's that. And then, of course, I maintain all the payments and billing infrastructure. So I've got a couple issues there that I need to work on. Server maintenance and that sort of operation DevOps type work is always ongoing. And then, of course, product development. Sidekiq 7.0 will be coming out sometime this year. I'm hoping to have it out by RailsConf, but I don't know if that's going to happen. I think we're only about 6 weeks away from RailsConf, and I still have a couple big ticket items that aren't making a lot of progress right now. So maybe I should work more is what I'm learning by just telling you how much I work.
But you don't seem to be stressed.
No, that's the thing is it's recurring revenue coming in. So I have revenue coming in. It's not like I have to work tomorrow to make the bills, right? I'm not charging hourly for my time. So I am lucky, very lucky in that way. So I have things to do, but no fires burning, so to speak.
So maybe we start a little earlier. When and why did you start getting into engineering? What is your nerd path?
So throughout high school, my parents bought me an IBM XT, which was 4.77 megahertz with a 20 megabyte hard drive. And I used that to go onto BBSs a ton. So it had a modem in it, and I would call and I would go to all these BBSs, and there would be forums there, and we would post messages back and forth. We would download software. And so I was into computers all throughout high school in terms of just using them to network and communicate. I didn't do anything technically really with them. Play games and read magazines. And I built my own computer when I went away to college. I built a 486 computer. And so that was the technical stuff I did. And then once I got to university, I found that I was spending 12 hours a day on my computer. And I realized, if I have such a passion that I love working on this machine all the time, maybe I should go into computer science. And so that's what I turned out. That's what I majored in. So computer science is when I first actually started programming. I never programmed anything until I was 18. And then after college, I got internships at an ERP vendor called PeopleSoft. And I did an internship at Microsoft. So I worked on the Windows NT networking team for a summer. And I broke the Windows NT build. That was my claim to fame. Is I broke the build and then jetted off back to school. But from college and from those internships, I was able to get jobs in the industry, and that's just once I was about 22, 23, just started getting jobs and then the .com era entered, and I started. I got jobs at that first generation of web properties, and that's when I started. And from there, I started getting into open source a little bit. I started using SourceForge, which was kind of like GitHub before GitHub,
with like a little more ads, right, and spam and stuff like that, as far as I remember, right?
Yeah, they struggled to monetize, so they were doing ads, I believe. That sounds right. But that was 20 years ago, so this is all kind of fuzzy in my memory now. But from there, I was doing Java web development for about a decade, from like 97 to about 2007, and that when in about 2005, I saw Ruby on Rails, and I got super jealous. And Ruby on Rails just blew me away. And so I said, I want my next job to be in Ruby on Rails. And so about 2006 or 2007, I got hired by a startup that was going to be built in Ruby. So I joined on there. But of course, when you're working in the Ruby on Rails ecosystem, so much of it is built on open source. And so I just since I already had a bunch of experience with open source, I just naturally kind of gravitated toward building and supporting infrastructure that was open source based. It's one of the things I love. I love open source, and I love the collaboration. I love the ability to solve your own problems by reading through the source code and seeing how something is built. It really kind of dispels the mysteries around things when you see, oh, this is the code that does it, and oh, this code's terrible, or this code is beautiful, or really elegant, or really interesting in some way. So as an engineer at heart, being able to see the source code for something really kind of just explained so much to me. And so yeah, that's kind of what I did. Is I started developing infrastructure and open source based stuff, and GitHub came along. Since we were working in Ruby on Rails, I was already working on a bunch of background job systems, and I sort of saw the need for a better system, and that's where Sidekiq came from.
And it is like, in a nutshell, it's just like it just decouples long running processes from the web, right? It doesn't block your requests anymore, right?
Yeah, exactly. It kind of encapsulates a unit of work that you want to do, and allows you to say, do that unit of work somewhere else. And so it's completely asynchronous, right? That unit of work does not return anything back to the caller. So you spin that thing off, and it's happening somewhere else. You don't know anything about it. And so once you do that, it enters into the Sidekiq world, and Sidekiq manages it. It'll catch any errors. It'll retry any if there was any problems executing it. It'll retry it over and over. It gives you a web UI, so you can sort of see the units of work that are in queued and in progress. So yeah, there's a surprising amount of complexity to it,
which is actually something that if you're not involved, if you never tried Sidekiq, you barely know, right? And it's surprising that, I don't know, people go for an enterprise license of that from the, like, if you never were involved with such a tool, you would say, why enterprise? Why not just use something simple? Why this? And people still do. And I think if you ever used your system, like I use it a lot, you feel, okay, it absolutely makes sense, right? And there's this good UI, and it actually enables you to do your work better. And I guess that's your pitch, right? That it saves you a lot of work.
Yeah, and it's also a matter of having a tool that is supported for a long time, right? Kind of like, why do people use Ubuntu LTS, long-term support? Because they know it's going to be supported for the next 5 years, right? Well, you can either, pick some random open source background job system that you don't know how well it's going to be supported for the next few years, or you can jump onto the thing that is popular and well commercially supported by myself. And so that's the value that people see is they get these features that are reliable and well documented, but they also know it's going to be supported, and they also know that they're going to be able to hire lots of people that have used it before because it's so pervasive in the Ruby community. So that's the pitch. Lots of people just use the plain old Sidekiq that's open source and free. But when you're a $1 billion company, you budget for tools for your developers to use, and sometimes part of that tool budget is tools like Sidekiq, where you pay thousands of dollars a year so that all of your developers in your company have a reliable a tool that everybody can standardize on.
With a nice guy that supports them.
Hey, I try. Sometimes I have bad days and I'm a little grumpy, and some days I'm nice. I must admit, sometimes you roll the dice, but I try to be nice as much as possible.
Okay. So how did you actually accidentally stumble into that as, like, was it a side job actually, or like when did you make Sidekiq your main job, and why?
Yeah, so I wrote a blog post recently because I had my 10th anniversary. Sidekiq just had its 10th anniversary in January, because I initially committed. I made the first commit in January 2012. And so I posted a 10-year anniversary blog post where I sort of went through the history of background jobs in Ruby and Sidekiq. But the executive summary here is that Sidekiq didn't spring from nothing. There were obviously background job systems before Sidekiq. In fact, there was 3 major ones: background RB, delayed job, and rescue. And each one was an improvement of from the one before. And of course, Sidekiq was an upgrade from rescue. And it just happened to be one that I decided to go the extra mile and try to commercialize. And I talked about this in blog posts back in 2012. I said, I'm going to be running some experiments here to try and make some money off this project so that I can long-term support it. Because what I saw and what I've seen throughout my decades of experience is that when you start a popular open source project, it lives for 10, 20, 30 years. And the question really is, who's going to remain around for that length of time to support it, to make bug fixes, to add new features, and what's going to incent them to stay with the project? And so my question to myself back then was, if Sidekiq becomes popular, who's gonna maintain it, 5 or 10 years from now? Because if it's free, then you're doing all this work for free, and you've dedicated your life and all of your free time to helping random strangers on the internet, and that's a recipe for burnout. And so you see a lot of open source burnout. But the one thing I said was, if I can make money off of this, I can turn it into a full-time job. And now it's a job that I'm passionate about, right? I love Ruby. I love performance and scalability. I love building tools, and Sidekiq kind of meets all of those criteria. So it's a job that I would love to have. I just need to be able to make money off of it. And so that's what I did. Is I spent 2 years sort of developing the core platform, and then a commercial layer on top that became Sidekiq Pro. And then in 2014, I decided to quit my full-time job because I was making more from Sidekiq than my salary at my previous job. And so I quit my job and started my company, Contributed Systems, in 2014. And since then, it's just been a nice, slow, steady increase in revenue every year. Generally a 20-30% increase in revenue every single year.
So do you think you grow because Rails generally is still growing, or is it just because like word of mouth and people talk about it and more companies actually discover your commercial version? Or
I don't know how much Rails is growing anymore, to be honest. I think it is a tool. I think it's a popular tool, and there's new people joining all the time. I think there's people leaving all the time. But Sidekiq itself, as it's gotten more popular and more features, and more developers working at companies have grown experienced with it, it's become a tool that they know and they trust. And so as they go to new companies, those companies then adopt Sidekiq and buy the commercial versions. So I think the growth is Rails developers learning that they can use it and that they can trust it, and also just new companies springing up. So yeah, that's part of it.
I actually have a theory that if more people like you would exist, that want to make want to get paid for the Rails stuff, for the contributions they make, or open source contributions in general, and start commercializing it, then we would have far better open source and far better communities. And for Rails, from my perspective, it would mean that it would maybe gain momentum again. Like as it's got little bit boring, and there's like a lot of important tools that are not commercialized at all. Like, for example, there's a tool called Active Admin, which generates you admin panels for your application. It's kind of a valuable tool, but I don't think that anyone earns money with that. And this would be something that should be changed, right?
Yeah, it's one of those projects that I've told people, hey, there's potentially room for a commercial version of Active Admin here. Certainly, a project like Django has an admin interface built into it, and maybe that's where people didn't want to take that leap, because Rails could at any time add an admin interface. The core team has always stopped at adopting a user model, and you really need a user model to have an admin interface. So But if Rails one day does decide to accept a user model, then suddenly the admin panel is on the table as a potential thing that Rails itself could adopt. So that's kind of one of the risks in creating any project is you never know when a larger product is going to create a competitor to you. I've always, one of the things I worried about a few years ago was Active Job, and how is Active Job going to compete, or I didn't know what Active Job was going to do with Sidekiq. And it really turns out there's still plenty of people that are using Sidekiq, so it really didn't amount to much. But I've also always wondered, Rails is kind of based in Basecamp, DHH's company. And I've always wondered if Rails was a separate company that was more like mine, where it just like literally provided Rails, the product, how that would change Rails. And I think there would be more push to adopt a user model, to adopt more functionality. I think Rails would start looking a lot more like Laravel, for instance,
Yep.
where Laravel just has this explosion of products everywhere, right? So it's interesting to see how how different projects work out and why.
Yeah, funny enough, I just had Taylor Otwell, the founder of Laravel, here on the podcast, and we spoke about like exactly the same and how he was inspired by Rails as well. I mean, it's so interesting that like he like just reinvented a framework which has like some similarities and similar features in a different language, and then just I mean, it's highly respectful. Came up with a lot of components that should exist, and just commercialize it perfectly fine.
Yeah, I mean, he's got things like in the Ruby world, we have things like Bullet Train and Jumpstart Pro, those sort of commercial add-ons that other people have developed. There's the Pay Gem, which has this like Stripe integration. But Laravel has all of that kind of built into their ecosystem. So yeah, it's some of the things that Laravel has built in, the Ruby world has sort of third parties and other people who sort of support them and maintain them. Of course, Sidekiq being another one.
Yeah, and sometimes, or most of the time, in their spare time, and that I think doesn't add up. I mean, they only has 24 hours, so when do you do that stuff if you're not mad, right?
Yeah. Yeah, well, I mean, DHH is making his millions every year with Basecamp, so he has no incentive to lock down anything about Rails. He wants to keep Rails as open as possible so that people adopt it as much as possible. And so that's why I've always wondered if Rails was its own company where it had to make its own revenue, then would he have things like Rails Pro, or would Active Job be a paid, add-on, or, whatever? The sky's the limit. But it's interesting to sort of have these mental exercises where you think, how would that affect this? Because money obviously affects, incentivizes certain directions, shall we say?
Obviously. So in the time you built Sidekiq, to come back to Sidekiq, and as not everyone knows Rails a lot here, what was your biggest challenge? The commercialization itself, or?
My biggest problem was that nobody had commercialized a gem before me. And so I had to trailblaze this path that nobody had done before. And I'll be honest, I was blown away, because Ruby gems supported a commercial sort of, it supported commercialization of gems before anybody had actually done it. I was able to actually just piece together this mystery and get the infrastructure to do what I wanted. But nobody had done it before. So I was like trying to figure out how to do, serving static assets through Apache, and how to get HTTP basic auth working. And every time you push a new version of a gem, you had to like update the server with and authentication. And I was just trying to figure out how to do all this, because there was like literally just nothing about it. And so, even today, I don't think there's much information about how to do it except for maybe my blog posts. Maybe some other people have posted, but I tried to blog about it. I put up a couple blog posts about it a few times, just to write something about it, to tell people, yes, this can be done. But that was probably the hardest part, was just trying to figure out how to do this thing that nobody had ever done before.
And how much marketing did you do?
The marketing that I did was solely focused to Ruby developers, and it was almost entirely through my blog. Like, I had been blogging for 2 or 3 years before I developed Sidekiq. And because before Sidekiq, I had maintained the memcached client for Ruby. And I had maintained a couple other open source libraries that got, a little bit of usage. So I had an audience through my blog. And so people knew me. I had a little bit of a name. Twitter, of course, was a thing by then. So people knew me through Twitter and posting Ruby tidbits here and there. So I just focused on blogging. So I blogged all about Sidekiq. I blogged about sort of the financial experiments I was doing. So I kind of documented this in real time, and people just got to know it. And so when I first threw out Sidekiq to the world, almost immediately, for instance, Andre Arco almost immediately adopted Sidekiq for his background job system. He's known as Indirect, one of the founders of Bundler, right? So, and Ruby Together. And so he's a somewhat of a big name in the Ruby community. So he adopted Sidekiq almost immediately, and was telling me that it was much better than previous systems he was using. So people just started using Sidekiq and promoting it with their friends and retweeting things that I was putting out. So the marketing was kind of guerrilla marketing. I of course had no budget, and people chipped in where they could. Like, I had people helping me with the web UI and design there. I had one person donate a logo. The guy kicking to the side. That was somebody just donated that to me, and that just sort of became my logo. So yeah, it was a sort of a crowdsourced effort.
And did you ever miss having a co-founder, or did you have like a mentor who helped you with that? How did you go through the path of actually like founding a company, becoming successful? It sounds like a lonely thing, right?
Yeah, it's hard to miss what you never had. But certainly there are areas where I'm very weak, and it's who knows what could have been different had I had somebody that was better at it. Like, to your point, I'm not good at marketing. And so the only way I've ever marketed Sidekiq is just through my blog, through Twitter, through, support, public support and GitHub and that sort of thing. So I don't know what could have been possible had I hired a VP of marketing and they focused on bringing in venture capital startups. I have no idea if that had worked or not, if that would have worked or not. But I had a friend of mine who was an accountant or a CPA. He helped me learn how to do bookkeeping. So I had somebody show me the very, very basics of bookkeeping. But aside from that, I had already been working on Sidekiq for 2 years when I founded the company, and I found a lawyer. The lawyer told me what to do the legal stuff. I found an accountant. The accountant told me what to pay, how much of a check to write, and aside from that, that's all I've ever really done. I live in a state that has no taxes, no sales tax. So I don't have to collect sales tax for like local sales. So thankfully, the taxes have been really easy for my business. But yeah, it's really hard to say what could have been different had I hired more? Or I always wondered, what if I had taken venture capital? Could I be $1 billion unicorn now? Or you look at a company like HashiCorp, which started around the same time that I started my company. And they're $1 billion company now. Could I be anything close to that? I don't know.
Are you in a way jealous or just curious when you think about this?
Well, I'm curious to know what could have been. I'm not jealous in any way. I try to take a sort of a Buddhist sort of point of view toward life, and I try not to be greedy or desire is the root of suffering, right? Attachment, desire, and attachment are the root of suffering. So I don't really need to have $500 million in money and sitting in a bank account because that's not happiness. So yeah, but I've always been curious. How could the future have been different? How could my path have been different had I gone down that path? Had I hired employees? Had I taken investment? That sort of thing.
And did you ever, from my perspective, if you do open source, then a very simple thing to do is to try hiring your contributors, right? Did you ever think about that? Or were you from the start convinced that you better not hire someone?
Well, my issue with hiring employees is hiring that first employee after me means that all of a sudden 50% of my time is devoted to admin and management of that employee, right? So I really go from having a job that I love and can focus on exactly what I want, which is typically product development and thinking about new features and API design. That's the kind of engineering I love. All of a sudden, I start to have to shift to being a manager and doing things I don't love, right? So I went down this path because I wanted to do the things that I love, and managing employees is, I don't think, one of them.
Okay, and did you ever think about making a real SaaS model out of it? I mean, right now you have a very relaxed, from my perspective, relaxed life because you have to maintain a software that people download, right? You don't have DevOps, all of that stuff. I mean, only for your distribution. Did you ever think about making it a real SaaS thing for other languages, stuff like that?
Well, so what I can do is I could provide something like Iron.io, which you package a container that knows how to run your jobs, and they'll run your container on AWS, right? And they'll make sure that your containers and your jobs are running and your queues are being drained. That's a 24/7 job where you're doing DevOps, and that's a case where you really want employees who own the pager and you have 24/7 support around the world. That's a scary thing for me to want to do. That is a great example of where I would want to take investment. I would want to hire, 5 or 10 engineers to build out this system and to manage the DevOps and to manage the pager in case anything goes wrong. Also, with SaaS models, you have a lot more of concerns around privacy, data, GDPR, and those sorts of things. Whereas with my current situation, you subscribe to my software and you download it and you run it within your own resources and your own four walls. And so basically, when people send me surveys saying, how much of our data do you have? How safe is it? I can tell them I have no data. I'm not going to sign any NDAs because I don't have anything to disclose. And that makes my life a lot easier than running a 24/7 SaaS. So yeah, you're right. It's a matter of, I've tried to go as far as I can toward providing as much value as I can. But if I did go another step further, I would have to start to hire people and probably take investment. Actually, I'm probably at the point where I could hire, 4 or 5 or 6 people to develop a new product if I wanted to, given that I'm already in the millions of dollars a year. But I would also have to raise my prices. Like, my price would probably have to go up 5 or 10-fold to adjust for the value and the cost of the thing that I'm running now.
And one more thing I wanted I'd like to discuss with you is the complexity of introducing SaaS into your software. I mean, you in a way run a software which is running on your machines, like the user's machines. It's simple. It's as you said, you don't have to sign any NDA. It's running on-prem. And in the last years, there has been like a certain trend towards no-code tools. Like, I, for example, love Airtable. But the more I build on behalf of it, the more I get the feeling that it solves a problem at first, but then it makes it more complex, actually, because you have to maintain the integration and you have to, like, keep up with their API changes and so on. What do you think about that? Will we see a trend there that people go back?
So this is one of my pet areas that I pound my fist on all the time, which is the notion of dependencies. When you're building a company, you want to build using dependencies that you can know will last as long as your company will last. So if you're building a company that will last for 3 more years, maybe Airtable is the right choice for technology. But if you're building a company that's going to last for 20 or 30 years, I'd argue Airtable is not necessarily a great dependency for your company to have, because now you're dependent on the company that provides Airtable to be around for the next 20 or 30 years. So those are that's the kind of thing that you have to think about. When I built my company in 2014, I had a couple dependencies especially in like the billing area. I was relying on one startup who provided my checkout process to sell my software. And after about 3 or 4 years, of course, they got acquired and then they got shut down. And so all of a sudden I had to move from using this startup software to building my own software on top of Stripe. And that's a case where I'm moving down the dependency stack. So, right, this startup was built on top of Stripe. And so now I'm getting rid of that startup and I'm building my own stuff on top of Stripe. And now I'm assuming that Stripe is going to last for 10 or 20 years from now, which at this point I think is a safe bet. But you always have to think about dependencies and how much can you depend on them, and what is the cost of that dependency, and if that dependency does go away, do you have a contingency plan to deal with that?
But that also applies to open source that you just download and install and include in your product. Like, I think Log4j is like the best example, right?
Yep, that's a great example. OpenSSL with the Heartbleed bug. There's, the world is absolutely chock full of open source projects that are no longer maintained, and yet people rely on, or they're poorly maintained. Right? They may have a maintainer who maybe puts in a couple commits a year to keep the build working, or maybe because it literally doesn't work with the latest version of Ruby or whatever. And so they do the absolute bare minimum to keep the lights on and to keep the thing going. But projects like Rescue or Delayed Job, they don't have a lot of maintenance anymore. They're on essentially life support. No one's really maintaining them beyond the bare minimum. And so that's sort of intrinsic with these projects that have no business model, have no life support model, have no support model, shall we say. Whereas Sidekiq does have that model because it does have the commercial aspect. So I work on Sidekiq every day.
But would you say it's still safer to use something like, let's say Airtable example again, something like MySQL instead of Airtable because you host it yourself, you control it yourself, you have the source code for it, and so on, even if you're not sure about like how well Oracle will maintain it, for example?
Well, MySQL, I think the longer something has been around, the longer you can assume it will be around, right? That's a general rule of thumb. So you can rely on paper in the printing press because they've been around for 500 years, and they'll probably be around for another 500 years. And so in that same vein, MySQL has been around for 20, 30 years now. You can be assured that MySQL will probably be around for another 20, 30 years. Now, Oracle, all bets are off, but something like Postgres should be around. And I believe Postgres does have some sort of support model. I think they sell consulting time for people, who are struggling with Postgres at scale. The core team does sell support time. So, building on something like Postgres or MySQL, I think is safe. But yeah, you got to watch out for those projects that are just one person working nights and weekends, so to speak.
Okay, and still, you would recommend rather using, let's say, boring on-prem tools than I don't know, the Airtables out there or the crazy VC funded stuff, right?
Well, it's a great question. I think any system is always going to need maintenance, so you're always going to need to have an engineer on staff for a system of any decent complexity. You're always going to need to have some sort of engineer to do maintenance. So the question is do you want to own this thing, or do you want to outsource it? I think something like AWS has proven that it has staying power and that you can rely on it. You can depend on it for decades to come. I don't know a lot about Airtable, so I won't speak to Airtable, but you have tools like Meteor.js was a JavaScript system a few years ago that was it was supposed to be like the next big thing, and it was built on top of MongoDB. And it was supposed to be like Rails, where it had, this integration with Mongo, really simple integration with Mongo, and it made front end development really easy. But it took venture capital funding, and anytime something takes venture capital, to me that starts a clock that clock is ticking down until that startup dies. So yeah, that's another question is this support model that this company has, is it venture capital backed or is it private equity backed? Because if it is, I would be very reluctant to use it for the long term.
If I would now start building a bootstrapped SaaS company, what would be your 3 key tips or recommendations you would hint me?
The thing about software is that it's incredibly cheap to build. So my rule number 1 is be really careful about any investment that you might take. You may not need it. So many startups in the software world take investment and then they have to show immediate profits. Because venture capitalists, they don't invest in something unless they think it's going to, go up by 10x or 100x. So, the question I would have is why are you building this thing? Are you building it to make money real quick? In that case, venture capital might be the right solution for you. You take a little money off the table, and then you flip the company in a couple of years, and you're done. But to me, that doesn't create any long-term value. And so to me, I said, I don't want to take investment because I want to create something that's profitable. And software is so easy to make profitable. You just gotta keep your costs under control. Be very leery of hiring and charge a good amount for the value that you're providing, and you can quickly become profitable. It really doesn't take a lot to be getting into the six figures, and now you're self-sustaining and you can grow at your own pace or however fast that the market will support you. So tip number one is if you can bootstrap and not take investment, do it, because then you get to reap all the rewards too. What's number two? Number two is keep your dependencies to a minimum and do the bare minimum, right? So don't build a Lamborghini when all you need is a Honda, right? Keep things simple and focused on what the customer needs. My server infrastructure for serving my software is a $5 droplet on DigitalOcean. I don't use AWS. I don't spend thousands of dollars a month on some CDN and AWS infrastructure that's all co-located all around the world. I've got two $5 droplets running in different cities, and that's it. So my infrastructure costs are $10 a month. There's a little more to it than that, but at the core, my software it does the bare minimum. It serves static files and it's running on these really simple droplets. And that's because I've kept things really, really simple. I don't run Rails I don't have any Rails apps running my software to serve this stuff. Everything is the only software I have running on my server is Apache. So Apache just serves static files, and that's it. And that's because I was able to figure out how to run the absolute bare minimum. And so that keeps my costs way down. And so by minimizing those dependencies, that's just one less thing I have to worry about. So number three is be careful with your business model and your pricing. You want to make sure that you're not too disruptive to the customer, because once you offer, functionality for free, it's really difficult to change that to suddenly start charging for it. I see a lot of people running things like beta programs where they say at the end of the beta program, we're going to start charging for this functionality. And that's great. That's exactly the right thing to do. You want to set expectations with your customer from day one that they're opting into something that's commercial, and make that very clear. That doesn't mean you need to tell them how much it's going to cost. You can obviously develop that over time, and you can change prices over time. But you do want to set expectations so that people aren't expecting a free lunch, so to speak. Otherwise, it's really disruptive, and you'll get a lot of grumpy, unhappy people. And I made some of those mistakes from day one. I initially sold Sidekiq Pro as a one-time fee. So you pay me this much, and then you get it forever. And I quickly realized that was a terrible idea. I don't want customers 20 years from now who paid me, $750 20 years ago to still be using my software and still be riding on that. So after about a year of those types of sales, I quickly sent an email to all my existing customers, and I said, listen, I'm going to start charging a subscription here. I apologize, but no more updates. The version, I gave them permission to run the version that they had forever. But if you want updates, you've got to subscribe. And so that's where I left that. And in fact, it's funny, a couple months ago, I had somebody contact me saying they wanted to upgrade because they were still running the version that they had paid for in 2014. And here it was, 7 years later, and they finally wanted to upgrade from that version they'd been running for free. So, those are my 3 tips.
Thanks a lot. So I still have a little surprise for you. I actually bought an old laptop. Your wife sold me an old laptop that you used for ages. I think it's an old MacBook Pro, and it actually she forgot to delete the hard drive, and it actually contained like an unreleased version of your Enterprise Edition which has a hidden Easter egg built in, which is the time machine feature. And it actually allows you to execute your Sidekiq jobs in the past and send them to the past and execute them there. And we now write a job which is built to whisper something into your younger self's ears. Back in the year 2010, just before you started Sidekiq, what would this job whisper into your ears?
First of all, I don't appreciate my wife selling my old hardware. I keep that around for a reason. Second of all, that time travel job was some of the best code I've ever written. So that's I'm sorry she sold it to you, but on the other hand, if you read some of that code, it's good quality stuff.
It is.
So what do I whisper to myself? Geez, there's lots of things in life you want to go tell your old self, right? Probably buy as much Apple stock as you can. Geez, in terms of Sidekiq and starting the business, maybe just started even a little bit earlier. I don't know. It's hard. I started Sidekiq right as I was leaving my previous job, and my previous job, anytime you work for somebody and you're building software, it's hard to know who owns that software. So I didn't start Sidekiq until after I had left my previous job. So that I would own the IP. So I couldn't start it any earlier, I guess. But I guess maybe I probably would have told myself the top 3 that I just told you. Get the business model right. Minimize your dependencies, Mike, and bootstrap, because you can do it. And it's funny though. I had a couple of goals when I started the company, and it's funny how all of those goals have come true. In fact, I've well surpassed those goals. So really, I'm quite happy with how things turned out. I don't feel the need to improve on what I've already done.
Cool. Thanks a lot for being my guest, Mike. Hope to have you here again soon and talk about the future then.
Thank you so much, Toby. Glad to be here.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to the Alphalist podcast. If you liked this episode, share it with friends. I'm sure they love it too. Make sure to subscribe so you can hear deep insights into technical leadership and technology trends as they become available. Also, please tell us if there is a topic you would like to hear more about or a technical leader whose brain you would like us to pick. Alphalist is all about helping CTOs getting access to the insights they need to make the best decisions for their company. Please send us suggestions to cto@alphalist.com. Send me a message on LinkedIn or Twitter. After all, the more knowledge we bring to CTOs, the more growth we see in tech. Or, as we say on Alphalist, accumulated knowledge to accelerate growth. See you in the next episode.